Welcome to another episode of the Upper Bowl Perspective, a Utah Jazz podcast showing that the fans sitting in the nosebleeds know just as much as those sitting courtside. Back for episode 2 of our offseason podcast. If you missed episode 1, we broke down all of our favorite picks for the Jazz that could be available at 9, 16, and 28 in the first round. And in today's episode, it's going to be a lot more draft talk. We had some suggestions from some of our listeners who wanted us to talk about some more prospects that the Jazz could potentially take at number 9. So that's where we're going to be starting off today in this first segment, is breaking down 3 more prospects that the Jazz could theoretically be taking with that number 9 overall pick, giving you a general overview and also our individual takes on how much we would want the Jazz to take them compared to other prospects. We're going to go ahead and start off with Landon Barnes, who will be breaking down Cam Whitmore. Landon, excited to see what you have for us.
Thanks, guy. The guy that I'm talking about right now is Cam Whitmore. Frankly, I probably would have loved to talk about him last time, but my thoughts going into it were I didn't think he was going to make it to 9, so I didn't think he was worth really talking about. But now that we can go in a deep dive on him, I just want to say I love Cam Whitmore. I love him as a prospect. I don't think there are a whole lot of downsides to him. He's a very strong athletic wing. I think he's about 6'7", 6'8". Built like a football player. Dude is like just yoked. Um, but it's surprising with that body that he is, how like agile he is, how quick he is. He's got a great first step. He can really blow by people. Excellent finisher at the rim. Very athletic. Really a good dunker, especially in traffic. He also has a really good shot. Looking at it, it's smooth. He's got a good high release point. And I think because of his strong base, he's always balanced. Like looking at his highlights, there's never like a shot he's taken anywhere where he doesn't look out of balance or struggling. He's always able to have really good form and keep that form no matter what the situation is. He's also a very good defender. Again, he's very athletic, very quick. He can guard multiple positions. His size, again, really makes him good. If teams were to try to switch like a big on him and beat him down the post, he could really hold his own in the paint. He doesn't have a very tight handle. That might be one of the weaknesses, is like, maybe his ability in isolation situations. But again, I think due to his strength and his speed, he doesn't necessarily need that. He can just kind of, pick a lane, plow his way to the basket if he really wants to. Very like LeBron James or Kawhi Leonard-esque in that way, where neither of them have the strongest handle, but they don't really need it because of, just their gifted athleticism. I think that there's a lot of upside to him and not a lot of downside. I think that he would be a very low risk prospect for the Jazz to take it. I think he has star potential. And if he's available at 9, they should absolutely pick him. Again, I think looking at all the mock drafts that I've seen of him, no one has him going higher than like 7th. So I don't know how realistic getting him would be. But I think picking that at 9 would be a no-brainer if he's available.
Yeah, in terms of Cam Whitmore, for me, of the 3 guys we're going to talk about today, he's also my favorites. I also agree that he's the least likely to be there at 9 of the 3. Depending on trade-up costs, I'd honestly probably trade up for him. I like him. He's a tier above the guys that are probably going to be there at 9 for me. So I agree with all the positives that Landon said in terms of a powerful scoring wing. Of kind of the guys that are going to go in the lottery, he's probably got like the second most NBA-ready body. He's like one of the 2 or 3 that are there where you don't think like, hey, this guy's got to bulk up. He's 230 pounds, which is already really good. Like Landon said, he uses that power to help him in scoring. I think he's not the most versatile shooter because his shot, it looks good, but it's just not very quick. So he needs a little bit of space. He can create that space on himself by himself, though. Landon said he doesn't have the best handle. He has some moves. He just needs to tighten it up a little bit. He loses the ball a lot, but when he is kind of in his bag, he can create separation with his handle. And defensively, Landon said he's good. He certainly has good moments. He certainly has bad as well, but he has enough good flashes that you can trust that he could be a good defender at the NBA level. My biggest question with him is passing and playmaking. Not only did he have a high turnover rate just because he was losing the ball, he's a terrible passer. He is no better than the second worst non-center passer that's going to go in the first round in this draft. and just a guy that's going to be that level of a ball stopper potentially really makes me nervous. I've had him anywhere from as high as fourth on my board this year to eighth, and the swing factor is how much I believe that playmaking was due to Villanova, where he went to college, because Villanova was outside of the top 300 in college basketball last year in terms of assist rate as a team. So how much of it was just Villanova just never passed the ball as a program, or how much of it is a deficiency in Cam Whitmore's game? So I think how much you can believe that Whitmore will at least be able to pass a little bit at the NBA level, not be a total ball stopper. That kind of factors into his rankings, because if the guy never learns how to pass, he's going to be Jordan Clarkson, and that's like a sixth man bucket getter off the bench, and that's not really who you want at 9. I think he has, I believe in him to be better than that. He is one of the guys that theoretically could be there at 9. Like I said, it's doubtful, but theoretically could be there at 9. That if you're talking ceiling, I think he's got the highest one there. I like going ceiling swinging at 9 and 28 in this draft. Talked about it last episode. I think those two spots are good. So, swing for the fences kind of spots. And so Cam Whitmore would be my preferred selection. Should he be there, or should he be a cheap trade up potentially away from our spot?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with a lot of what you guys have been saying. I think out of all the guys we're going to talk about in this pod today, he definitely has the highest upside. Just watching, like, if you see all of his highlights, the athleticism that he has is truly impressive, and the strength that he already has, only being, I think he'll still be 18 on draft day, right? I think he's like super, super young. And you can just see how this combination of size and strength and athleticism and his first step, how that could very easily translate to the next level. If there was going to be a knock against Cam Whitmore and what he's going to be turning into, or maybe what the floor looks like a little bit more with him, I think Kyler really touched on it well with just being that ball stopper. He had a negative assist to turnover ratio. It was 0.45. So not very good at all on that end of the floor. And even sometimes you would see him where he would almost try to get a pass off when I was watching some of his games, and you would see where he would almost try to pass, and just the decision making on the pass was poor, which you hope that when a guy's getting a pass, he's hitting a guy up for another shot. And it was really more, there was an opportunity for that, but the pass just wasn't quick enough or accurate enough to actually translate into points, which is a little bit concerning. I think really for Cam Whitmore is that he's a guy that if he gets in with a really good developmental program who helps him with his skills that he doesn't already have, can we get you maybe a slightly quicker shot release? Can we get you to be a better ball mover? Can we get you to maybe rotate a little bit better at times? I saw that sometimes he would get a little bit lost. I think he has incredible upside just because of his physical tools, but I don't think he's going to be a guy who, even though I could see him being one of the top 5 players from this draft in like 3 years, I wouldn't be surprised if he's a guy who, just because he needs to learn some of these other skills that'll make him more NBA ready from like a skill standpoint, that maybe he's not a guy who's on an all rookie team. Like, I could very easily see that path form where he's not on an all rookie team, but he's later one of the best players from this draft class in like a few years after he has time to clean up some of these skill sets. So I currently have him as 8th on my board. I've had him anywhere between 5 and 11, but I have him at 8 right now. And I think if the Jazz are looking for a high upside player who could theoretically be a really important piece for a good team, I think that Cam Whitmore could definitely be that guy.
I wouldn't be surprised if he makes a rookie team if he's basically asked to be Jordan Clarkson year 1 and then develop from there. Because I think if you're asking him to, hey, we just need some buckets for the next 5 minute stretch, and he comes in for a few of those a game, I think he could actually put up some buckets. But like you said, the other parts of his game need work. So I could see him being perhaps one of the better scorers. It just depends on what his role is. If his role is simplified into being like an off the bench bucket getter in year 1, and they let him develop, which I think should be his role year 1. I could see him being good in that role, but asking to make a lot of decisions in an offense, it's going to be a bumpy ride.
Yeah.
But probably one he needs to take, honestly.
Yeah. I think there's going to be a lot of ugly Cam Whitmore games his first season or two, like a lot of really, really ugly Cam Whitmore games, regardless of who he plays for. but it's so hard to not just see his highlights and recognize the upside. I mean, for me, when I was doing my research on him, his step back three is like really impressive for how old he is and given his size. I mean, like watching him just absolutely put people on skates, or they're so terrified of him driving to the basket that he's able to get that separation on the three and knock down those shots. Like you can easily see that translating at the NBA level. It's just, is he going to make too many mistakes in those other aspects of his game that aren't strong, that are going to potentially hinder how many minutes he gets, or if he's playing in like a starting role, or if he's playing off the bench, or if he can play with other star players. Like I think those are definitely question marks for him. But if he can get it all put together, that's a super intriguing talent.
I mean, I think situation will be huge for him, kind of like you guys alluded to. He's going to a good coaching staff that, has a good culture and will be able to develop him, give him time. I think he has all-star potential. Again, if he's going somewhere where right off the bat he's asked to be, the guy in a team that maybe has, unproven coaches, unproven talent, then yeah, that'll be rough. But I'm all in on this guy and his upside.
I think like he's the one guy who could be at 9 who maybe has the potential to be the guy, like you're talking about in the future. He's just, if you want him to be that, it's gonna be for a team that wants to take next year because it's not gonna be good in year one. But he could theoretically eventually get there. He has some tools in his body. It's just uh, his mind hasn't quite caught up yet, which he is, like J. Bobby said, one of the youngest players in this entire draft class. I think he will be 18 on draft night, but he turns 19 like right after it.
Yeah,
So
like 5 days later, something like that. Yeah.
basically a 19-year-old. But yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's like part of me would almost love to see him on the Pistons just as like an NBA fan, like just seeing how he could potentially work with like the young team that they've already built out. I mean, the Pistons got their center last year. They have Cade Cunningham, Killian Hayes is getting better all the time. They have Jaden Ivey. Like that could be a role where he can make a lot of mistakes on a team that isn't expected to be good next year, and it could be a lot of fun. Where I think the Jazz, just because of Lauri Markkanen and Walker Kessler and some of the other pieces in their coaching, they might be slightly ahead of Detroit in terms of how good they can be next year. So I think it's just going to be interesting that would the Jazz even be willing to, like, for example, trade the 9 and the 16th to move up to 7? Like, I don't know if that would be a possibility or if he'd be there at 7, but that's also an intriguing thought to see. Would the Jazz be willing to do that? And would you be willing to give up 2 picks to move up a couple spots to snag him?
That's tough. I mean, we're talking about trade ups late in the second segment, so maybe I shouldn't go too deep in depth. I love the 16th pick in this year's draft just because of the possibility to get a point guard over the future. So that's tough for me. I'd almost rather give up a future first, but I don't know if that would do it. But I would be willing to trade up for Cam Whitmore depending on the cost. I think he's better than anyone that's going to be there at 9 realistically by a tier in my big board.
It's certainly going to be fun, and definitely once we get our big boards finalized, we're going to have to share them because I think it's going to be really interesting to just see where we have our different tier breaks and everything going forward. But I think we're all definitely very high on Cam Whitmore's potential, and even though he likely won't be there for the Jazz, it is a possibility, and I guess we'll see here in a few weeks. Kyler, let's move over to you. You've got a guy who sneaky become one of my favorite guys in this entire draft. And I'd love for you to explain one of the best players we saw in college basketball last season.
Yeah, so I'm talking about Jarris Walker. He's a forward who can play a little bit of small ball 5 for you. Played for Houston, was an integral part for one of the best college defenses in the nation last year, like you said. And kind of like how I talked about with Taylor Hendricks last week, very similar type player where you're getting just an absolute beast of a defender who offensively isn't quite there yet, but maybe has some things to show you that you could be excited about his future offensively. Jarris Walker, I think he's another one of those guys that's going to go in the top 10 that has an NBA ready body. He measured in at the combine at 250 pounds. That's maybe even a little bit too heavy. Might need to be the reverse of everyone. You might want to cut him back about 10 pounds, but he has NBA level strength. Hard to, he will not get bullied in the post or anywhere. With that size, I think it's a little bit harder to say confidently that he'll guard guards effectively. Apart from just like at a switching level, I think you can easily switch him onto a guard. But just saying, hey, you're guarding the opposing team's best player every night. I don't know if he's that level, which he has been touted as by some, but very, very good defender, off ball, on ball, rebounding, just the whole defensive package. Offensively, kind of just comparing him to Hendricks, who I have them right side by side on my board, and I talked about Hendricks last time. I think he's a little bit more versatile offensively than a Hendricks. He showed more ability to handle, more ability to pass than a guy like Hendricks, but his shot looks good. The percentages are at a spot you're comfortable with. I forget where he was at, but it's you look at the percentages, like, yeah, that's going to be a good shooter. The reason I have Hendricks one spot higher, though, is just because I feel like offensively, Walker can do a lot of things at a decent level. I don't know if you're super confident in any of his offensive abilities. I think he can be a decent shooter. I think he can handle okay, he can pass okay, but what does that equate to being an offensive player? Whereas like a guy with Hendricks, I'm very confident in his ability to shoot the ball more so than a guy like Walker. So he's my second favorite guy that we're going to talk about today. I also think he's the second most likely to be there of the three that we're covering in our first segment. So have him right at 9 on my big board. I think it would be perfect value. But I like Jarace Walker kind of just for the same reasons I like Taylor Hendricks, just a slightly different player, offensively.
Yeah, I think Jarace Walker is solid at 9. Obviously his defense is incredible. I love his defensive potential. I definitely have some doubts about what he can be offensively, at least like as a perimeter type of scorer. Like you said, his percentages were decent, but his release was very slow. I'd be concerned about that translating into the next level. The only real major concern I have with him is, again, asking ourselves, what's our long-term view on Lauri in the current front court that we have? Because this guy is like a dream, small ball 5 or modern day NBA 4. I think he can be a menace in the high post, just, facilitate or, take someone off the dribble and even be like a pick and pop threat. But really, if we're going to get him this high in the draft, we want to, utilize him as like a starter going forward. What's his role going to be if we still have Lauri going down the next few years? So I think if we're going to draft him here, we need to know what our plan is with Lauri Markkanen. Are we going to keep him long term or not? Because that'll determine, I think, if this would be a good thing for us.
See, it's like that's actually what I kind of like about Jarace Walker specifically in this spot is that I think he's a player who could play extremely well with Markkanen and Kessler. Markkanen is a great offensive talent and a decent defender. And I think that Jarace Walker, he could be the guy that could come in and be the really, really great defender who can take the harder defensive assignment and maybe be more of a secondary or tertiary guy on offense, where Markkanen can really shine in his role as a lead offensive player for the Jazz. And then, the shooting percentages for Jarace Walker are good. They're 34% from three is what he shot last year, but it was on fairly low volume. But it's really the defensive numbers that get me really excited. He had like almost 16% rebound percentage. And I want to say he was like at close to a 6% block percentage as a forward, which are just incredible numbers given his size and given the level of talent he was playing against, even though it was at the college level. So for me, I think that if you're looking at fit, I think Jarace Walker is actually a guy that if you're the Jazz front office, you take a closer look at, just because I think he's a player who would fit seamlessly in with the two guys that we already are building around, which is Markkanen and Kessler.
You think all three of them could share the court at the same time and that be effective?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think so too. I question that it would bring the most out of Jarace Walker, though, because kind of like with Taylor Hendricks, I think he's best utilized if he's playing a lot of help defense. Like Houston would play a lot of zone or put him in kind of like a more rover role. He can play on ball defense, but I like him basically doing a lot of the rotating on the defense, kind of picking up wherever the action is going on the offense, he's going to somehow be involved in it defensively, which means you're putting him on the team's probably worst perimeter player, which means all of a sudden Lauri Markkanen is given a tougher task defensively. So I think offensively, the fit is seamless, but defensively, I just feel like to get the most out of Jarris Walker, you're putting him in a role that probably isn't ideal for Markkanen, being put on a skilled perimeter player and asked to play perimeter defense just because Markkanen, he's a 7-footer, not the like most athletic guy you'll ever see. He's fine athletically, but he can't be taken off the dribble by, a quick three, which he'd probably be asked to guard pretty consistently. So, or you just put that guy on Jarris Walker, which is fine. He could take that task. I just think he could be a better defender if given a different task.
Yeah. I think it'll definitely be interesting because Markkanen is still young. I mean, yeah, he was an all-star starter last year, but typically guys in his position, they typically tend to peak around the 27, 28 range. And I think Markkanen's 24, 25 right now. I forget the exact age, but I think that Markkanen's going to go up a level as well. And just Jarris Walker has an NBA ready body. And I think the versatility he's going to bring is just going to be so huge to a team that wants to be a title contender in, 5 years or so, which I think is the plan that the Jazz are on right now. You see it how rotations shorten in the playoffs. We saw it with the Lakers, how they basically had a 7-man rotation, and the Nuggets, how they basically had a 7-man rotation in the last round. And I think what gets me excited about a guy like a Jarris Walker is that in the playoffs in a few years, he could be that guy that when Kessler has to take a break, assuming that he's still our center at that point. I mean, is he a guy that can come in and play like 15 really solid minutes in center, and where we don't have to play some bumbling 7'2" big who might hurt us when when we need that extra size. So just even me looking more forward as to the type of guys I want the Jazz to have in 5 or 6 years, having a guy who could have Jarris Walker's versatility is something that just makes me so excited about just what happens when you shorten the lineup in the playoffs and which players you don't have to play because your starting 4 could also be your backup 5. And then you just switch, like maybe you have your opening and closing minutes with like him and Kessler together. But then, throughout the middle of the game, maybe they're playing a little bit on and off. But anyway, that's just been kind of my thought is that I think out of all of the guys who could be that versatile, really good starting forward potentially, and then also like a really like elite small ball 5, I think Jarris Walker's the clear guy in the draft who could fill that versatile role for a team in the future, which I think is incredibly valuable come playoff time.
Yeah, I agree. I disagree with that. Like him and Kessler, like in the middle of the game, should be swapping minutes to the 5. I don't think the 5 is his best role. I think it's something he should play at times situationally, but I don't think that should be like in your nightly plan because I do think his best role is the 4 who can play small ball 5. But I don't think that should be something you're doing every night.
Oh no, like it would definitely be like based on situation and based on matchup. I just like having the option, to in the future that if you're playing against a team that plays small ball, or if you need to have a little bit more quickness, or you want to be able to space 5 out, like he's a guy who could potentially play that role when it makes sense.
Yeah, I'm becoming more and more convinced that like your championship potential as a team has so much to do with your defensive versatility. So I think having a guy like this that you can play against varied offenses or having a defense where you can switch 1 through 5 is going to be valuable, and he's a very good player for that.
Yeah, like speaking on that, I'm just more convinced that you just can't have a bad defender. Like even if they're not all like Jarris Walkers, which they're not going to be, just don't have terrible defenders. Which is why like every time last episode somebody was a bad defender, I said no because I just don't like people who are just I'm very confident in or have a high probability of being bad defenders. I'm just kind of out on them in this year's draft.
Well, it would certainly be fun to see him in a Jazz uniform. He's someone who could definitely be available, so it'll be fun to see if the Jazz end up taking him. It would definitely be fun for the Jazz's front court for the next several years. The final player we're going to talk about in this first segment is the guy who's probably most likely to be there out of the 6 that we've talked about, or the 6 we're going to talk about at the 9th pick, other than potentially Grady Dick, and that is Cason Wallace. I have personally struggled with him more than almost any lottery pick on where I want to put him on my big board. I've had him as high as 9, and I've had him as low as 19 over the past 3 weeks. But just to give you a better idea of what kind of a player he is that he's one of the great defensive guards in this draft. We talked about it in the last episode, how there's so many great defensive guards that can be taken in the first round. I mean, just last week we talked about Jalen Hood-Schifino, we talked about Anthony Black, and Casey Wallace is another guy who projects to be a great guard defender at the next level. On the year, he shot almost 35% from 3, so he's definitely showing flashes as a guy who could be a great shooter, especially off the catch. There's actually a crazy stat that I saw that through the games on through January 2nd this year, he was at actually 47.5% from 3 on 61 attempts. So the first half of the college season, he was shooting absolutely lights out, and then it averaged out a little bit more through the season. He's a guy who has a really quick release, which is really nice to see because he is a little bit shorter. I've seen differing reports. Some people have him at 6'2", some people have him at 6'4", but he's definitely a little smaller than a lot of the draft or a lot of the guards that we've talked about so far. But despite his maybe not perfect offensive game, he projects to be a guy who's a really, really good point of attack defender. He also plays really well off ball. And what I loved just seeing some of his highlights, some of his games, that he's super opportunistic. His steal rate was extremely impressive, and just you would watch him how he'd just be looking across the court, kind of seeing what kind of plays the other team was running, and then he would just dive into a passing lane and get a steal and then run it back the other way and get an easy transition bucket. I do worry to see how his offensive game is going to translate. He definitely doesn't seem to be the primary scoring guard on a team, at least right now. His shooting off the dribble hasn't been great, although his catch and shoot numbers have been pretty awesome. He doesn't have an elite first step either, and he can sometimes struggle to create his own space. So are there question marks in terms of can he be a really competent scorer at the next level? I think those are really fair, issues that you might have if you're looking at drafting him. But if you're looking for a guy who's just a dog, who's going to come in and play great defense and play smart, I think that Casey Wallace could definitely be a guy that teams are going to take a closer look at. I think the Jazz are not going to take him at 9 because I think there's better options at 9, but he would be someone that at the same time, I don't think he's going to make it to 16 either. I think he's going to go somewhere in probably the 12 to 14 range. So I think he's somebody who's just a little bit not quite good enough for the Jazz's pick at 9. He's probably a little too good for the Jazz to get him at 16. But I think he's definitely got a guy who it'll be easy to see him playing real minutes next year just because of how smart he is, his catch and shoot numbers, and his great defense.
Yeah, for Casey Wallace, for me, he's 12th on my big boards. I wouldn't like him at 9. Like you said, he's not going to be available at 16. So he's just a kind of guy that I haven't really thought about much for the Jazz just because I don't see it happening, or I wouldn't love it to happen. I'm sure if they picked him at 9, I would convince myself that he's great. But yeah, like you said, in a draft full of a bunch of point of attack defenders at point guard, he's the best, or he was in college at least for sure last year. Just an absolute joy to watch defensively. This guy is awesome defensively. His mindset, his quickness, his technique is all just chef's kiss, beautiful. But the reason I have him at 12 and below Hood-Schifino and Kobe Buffkin, who kind of are similar roles in the future, is because of something you touched on with his on-ball offense. I think if you're a team that already has the guy that you're going to be running your offense through on offense, he's way up on your board. He's first among these point guards because his off-ball, like you said, the catch and shoot, everything is great. Because the Jazz don't have that, and because my big board is assuming that you don't have that because there's not a ton of those in the NBA, that's why I have him lower. I just don't believe, from what I saw, that he's going to be the guy who you want with the ball in his hand running your offense through. And for the most part, if you don't have somebody like that that's not your point guard, you're going to be doing that through your point guard. His handle is pretty subpar for a point guard. I think his passing reads are fine, but they're nothing that are going to get you excited as a point guard. Really, all the things that get you excited offensively as a point guard are from what he does off ball. So Dallas picking right behind Utah, I would love Casey Wallace for Dallas. I think he's a much better long-term fit alongside Luka than a guy like Kyrie. But so love him. If all you're looking for is a defensive point guard, he's the best in the draft. And then if you're just hoping that the Jazz could eventually find somebody to be their lead ball handler to play like the 2 or the 3 or something, then that's great. But that's not the easiest thing to get, somebody that you can trust to have the ball in their hand or to run your offense to that's not playing point guard. So because that's a rarity, I would rather him get drafted to somebody who already has it. I would love for he would be perfect for Boston, but Boston's never going to get him. Like if he went to Boston, oh boy, dude, he would be incredible. He would be such a good player. He might even freaking win Rookie of the Year. But so that's my thoughts on Cason Wallace. I think he's a good player in a vacuum. I just think the Jazz aren't the best fit for him.
Yeah, him going to Dallas, the more you brought it up, actually sounds like
that's like of the realistic possibilities. That's where I wanted to go the most.
I just want to reiterate what you guys said. Watching him play defense is a religious experience. I've never seen a more technically sound perimeter defender as young as he is. He is excellent. Really, I think most likely the scenario for him is he's going to be like a long-term perennial backup point guard. That seems like could be a role that'll fit him really well. Someone you can throw out on one of their guards if they're having a good night, trying to cool them off. At the same time, someone you can help space the floor and shoot. He does have a very well-rounded offensive game. Pretty good looking jump shot. Again, I guess the handle's not quite there, like you mentioned, but I think those things can develop. Really, the question I have is, can his offensive skill set overcome his lack of athleticism? So I think that's going to determine whether he's able to play at the next level or not. I think to me that's going to determine whether he's going to be like a Davian Mitchell or a Lou Dort or like a Drew Holiday. Can that offensive game translate? Because if it can, I think again you can see him be in the starting point guard of a very good team. If not, I think he's going to have a 10-year career as a backup guard.
Yeah, I think. Sorry. Go ahead, Jibbo.
Okay, sounds good. Which I think that goes a lot of what both of you were saying is that I think fit is going to be so important with him. I think out of a lot of the guys who could go in the top 10, he's one of the ones where fit is going to be, I think, extremely important to see what kind of player he is and how people view his skill set. Now, this isn't a perfect comparison, but it kind of reminded me just a little bit about how CJ McCollum's career changed. And CJ McCollum and Cason Wallace are not the same players at all, but just seeing how CJ McCollum was an elite second guard when he was playing with Dame. And then when he moved over to New Orleans, you can see how he struggled a little bit more to be that lead guard, but he was able to thrive because of all the looks and all the opportunities he had playing with an elite player like Dame. And I think with Cason Wallace, if he's asked to be that the best guard on a good team, I think it's going to be really hard for him to excel in that role. But I think if he's allowed to play off ball, if he's allowed to play elite defense, and he can just really maximize his role, I think he's going to be somebody who's going to be talked about is this guy an all-star level talent, even if he's the second best guard on his team, just because of the situation and the fit that he plays in, which is why I actually hadn't thought of Boston, Kyler. I'd obviously thought of Dallas because, it's right there in that range. But dude, seeing him on Boston, he would look so dang good on that team. And Luka would probably become his best friend in 5 minutes. He's wait, somebody else will play defense for me because I don't play defense. And I could just have somebody that I can make these ridiculous passes to. But then at the same time, if I see him going to a team where they don't have another good guard and he's expected to come in and be the point guard right away, I think it's going to be really tough given his current skill set to really excel in that role. So I think that Cason Wallace could be a guy who could be one of the best impact players in this draft if he goes to the right situation. I could also see the possibility, like Landon said, of him being a perennial backup if he's not put in a situation where his weaknesses are hidden a little bit and he's able to maximize his strengths.
And then the final note that I wanted to say on that is he is a Kentucky guard, and there's been a track record of Kentucky guards just coming out and all of a sudden having a bigger offensive bag than they showed at Kentucky because Kentucky limited them. Devin Booker's probably the biggest example of that in recent years, where he was labeled as a catch and shoot player, which is what Cason Wallace is being labeled as offensively right now. And all of a sudden he came out and he could score at all 3 levels. Great for himself. I just don't see the abilities in Cason Wallace's body to be able to do that. But That's always a little hidden. I don't like scouting the school. I like scouting the player if I can, and then maybe grazing some things off of the school. But there is a track record of Kentucky guards just working out and being better pros than they were in college. So just thought I'd give that nugget.
No, it's a very, very fair comment. And this just such a fun draft because there's so many good players that could potentially go to the Jazz at 9 who have such high potential or who have such high impact potential that it's definitely going to be fun to see who the Jazz end up taking at 9. We're going to take a break here in just a second, but when we come back, we're going to dive into part 2, where as much as we love a lot of the options at 9, what if we could move up in the draft and take another player who might be even better? So that's next. We'll see you in just a moment. Welcome back for part 2, where we start getting into some of our favorite things to talk about, which is potential trades. We love doing mock trades on this podcast. And as we get closer to the draft, there is a lot of buzz, a lot of rumors out there that certain picks might be available. For example, with Portland, there's been multiple reports that they're actively trying to shop the 3rd pick if they can get a player that will help them win now. There's also been some rumblings that Houston with the 4th pick, that they're going to sign James Harden in the offseason. And if that happens, they already have young talent with guys like Jalen Green and Alperen Şengün and Jabari Smith. So they would be looking to potentially trade that pick to see if they can expedite their rebuilding process and build around James Harden. I don't love that as like a basketball fan, but I think it's interesting to talk about. Then there's even been some very limited rumblings, which once again, these aren't substantiated, but that even Charlotte at 2 isn't a huge fan of Brandon Miller or Scoot Henderson, and they may be looking to trade back in an effort to get more assets. So there is some very real possibility, especially with the 3rd pick, that the Jazz could potentially trade up. And we have one of the biggest war chests of draft picks and a lot of young talent in the NBA that we become one of the more obvious suitors as somebody, if we wanted to move up into the draft to take somebody in the top 4, that we would have the assets and the timeline that it might actually make sense to do it. So here's my question for both of you is, one, what do you think it would take the Jazz in terms of a trade to be able to move up into like the 2nd, 3rd, or 4th pick? Like what would that trade look like from the Jazz perspective? What would we have to give up? And once we figure that out, if you're the Jazz front office, would you do that betting on the long-term upside potential of one of those top picks?
Like you said, the rumors that are at least more substantiated are that the picks are for sell for win now moves, not for draft picks, which translates to the Jazz needing to trade Lauri Markkanen if they want to get into the top of this draft. He's the only guy that would even make a team think about saying yes. That's the only caliber player we have. Also a starter. It wasn't like a true also a starter. We say that like it's something that he did. It was a lot of shenanigans went into making that happen, but he was an all-star, just straight up for sure. And he was considered for most of the year to be 3rd team All-NBA until kind of the Jazz tapered off at the end of the year and he kind of lost that spot. So that's the kind of caliber of player that could get you in the conversation. I honestly don't know if even Lauri Markkanen alone could get you into 2 or 3, just because it's kind of considered by many to be a 3-player draft. Maybe it could get you into 4. But I guess we're not answering whether or not we would do it for these picks yet. But honestly, I think if you're not offering Lauri Markkanen, you're not getting into the top of this class.
If that's the case, then I would say no. I mean, I personally love Laurie. I think he's a very rare type of player. I think he's someone that we're looking to have. Might be in the minority on that, but I like him. So if that's the cost, then I would say hold out. There's a lot of parity in this draft between draft picks like 6 and 16. Jazz need a wing, Jazz need a guard. Both of those are in abundance in that area. I think we can hold on to what we have and add to it and add some really good players with the 1st-round picks we have this year. I don't think we need to give up Markkanen.
Do you think it's possible to move up into the top of this draft for not include Markkanen though?
No, I think you're right about that. I don't think any of these teams, especially if you're looking at like a Portland, right? They're not going to want future first round draft picks. They're on the clock with Damian Lillard, right? They need all-star talent to match with him. So I would agree with you there. It'd have to be him or Kessler. Even Kessler, you'd probably have to throw in some other players or picks to really sweeten the deal.
Yeah, I agree. If Kessler's the main player going back, it's Kessler and a lot of picks.
Multiple firsts, yeah, to be
Yeah.
able to get there. I mean, like just for me personally, when I was first thinking about this question, my like immediate gut reaction was, why would we trade Markkanen for the third pick or whatever in the draft? Because that would be the most likely scenarios that we trade Markkanen for the third pick. And like that was my immediately reaction of no, like that's terrible. We love Markkanen. He's a great player. We got him on an awesome contract. And then I started playing devil's advocate with myself a little bit. And me playing devil's advocate with myself, I was kind of convincing myself that it may not be a terrible idea. And this was the general, I guess, argument that I came up with. And I'd love to hear your thoughts because I'm not 100% sure where I stand right now on it. If you are a GM, your job should always be do whatever it takes to try to bring a championship to your team. That should always be the goal. We've talked about it on this pod. Sometimes you have to make really hard decisions and trade players that you love, that the franchise loves, that have been really good for you in order to make a good business decision to give your team the best shot at winning a title. And I was thinking, if that is your goal as a GM, I mean, Markkanen's on a great contract, but is he going to be around? Like, is he going to choose to stay with the Jazz when his contract's up, I think, in another 2 years or 3 years? I mean, it's almost impossible to think that the Jazz are going to be a legit title contender in the next 2 or 3 seasons. Like that just doesn't seem to be a very likely scenario. So if that's the case, is giving up Markkanen now, despite the great player he is, despite the great value he is with his amazing contract, I think we're only paying him $16 million a year, for a chance of getting a guy who could potentially be like the best guy on a title team in 7 years. Like that's a possibility with a guy like Brandon Miller or a guy like Scoot Henderson. Then does it actually make sense that we're just going to trade Markkanen now, get a young player that this is the guy that we are going to build around with our other young talent? And then does that give you a better shot at actually winning maybe in 2029 or something like in that range? And I think if I'm a GM, I think it makes sense that if I'm looking purely for am I trying to win in 6 years, it makes more sense to get a top draft pick that I have 7 years of control over that could be insanely good and probably has a much higher ceiling than Markkanen. And so that's where I kind of come into this on, as a Jazz fan who loves watching the Jazz play now, part of me really wants to keep Markkanen. But as a Jazz fan who really wants to see the Jazz host the Larry O'Brien in the future, it's kind of like, is nothing untouchable to get a guy like a Brandon Miller or like a Scoop? So I want to know, am I crazy there? Am I thinking, or do you think like I'm onto something with that thought process? Because I'm still trying to figure out exactly where I lie on this spectrum.
I think you're right, at least in terms of me, in terms of thinking, could you perhaps get the best player on a title team for a player who, I don't know what your thoughts on it, if you think Larry Markkanen can be the best player on the title team. That would be a swap that would be interesting to me. What I think you're wrong on is a GM thinking 6 years in the future. GMs don't have really the job security to think that far ahead. Most GMs are thinking, can I win in the next couple of years to keep my job? I mean, Danny Ainge has a reputation, but you also have to be like Justin Zanik's also out there. Does Justin Zanik have a 6-year leash? We don't really know. Some different organizations have different levels of patience with their GM. Some owners tolerate years of mediocrity with the GM because, you know, they trust in their process or whatever, you know what I mean? Others are like, it's been a few years, not really seeing on the court progress. I'm going a different direction. So I think saying I'm building for a team 6 years now in the future is just something you have to have a level of job security as a GM that's just so incredibly rare that I just think it's not really something you think about often.
So then really this isn't a GM question. Would a GM do it? It's, would Ryan Smith do it? Does Ryan Smith see that vision? Is he telling the GMs, I recognize we're not going to be ultra competitive in the next 2 years. You have a free leash. You bring up a super good point because I wasn't even thinking about GMs being one of the least stable jobs ever, because you make one mistake or just somebody gets frustrated with you and you're immediately out. So that's actually an
Yeah,
amazing
like if
point.
you trade Lowry and he continues an upward trajectory, you said before he was like 24 or 25. He's 26, so I think he is a little bit more capped out. But um, I mean, we could see some subtle improvements just because he was so much better last year than he has been for the entirety of his career, which is a topic that I want to discuss on another podcast. But um, if that player continues to win all NBAs and you pick somebody who's has a slow start to their career, you're probably fired. You trade an all NBA player for a guy who's just not helping your team win. That's not a move that you are going to survive through, because not only did you trade the all NBA player who for a guy that you didn't know anything about, like he was already at the all NBA level, right? Like I said, he was considered at that level for the most of last year until the Jazz kind of tanked at the end. Wish they would have done it a little bit sooner in the season, and then that kind of took him out of consideration because your team being good is factored into all NBA. So, um, now to the factor, would I do it? Would I consider it? I haven't answered that question yet. Honestly, I love Scoot Henderson in this draft. And I would have a very long conversation with the other decision makers in the front office. I'd be calling up Danny Ainge, Justin Zanuck, Ryan Smith, telling them to tell me where to go because I love Lowry. Like I said, there's another podcast discussion that I want to have about him that makes me really tempted to do this deal. I wouldn't just throw the card to Portland and say, if Scoot's there, we're giving you Lowry and not think twice about it. But it would be very, very tempting to me. But it would only be for Scoot. I wouldn't do it for Brandon Miller or anybody else in this class. Or I guess, I mean, if Victor Wembanyama, which isn't going to happen, I would absolutely trade Lowry for Victor. But nobody is even accepting your call. The Spurs aren't accepting your call. So it would be Scoot. It would be the only realistic person that I would even consider this for in this draft.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it would absolutely have to be one of the top three to even consider it, right? It'd have to be one of those guys. And one of the things you brought up, Jared, was like timeline and making sure we have, all these players that can kind of, fit the same timeline. I think we have a very exciting timeline possibility where we could keep Markkanen, have these really good players still on the rookie deals, maybe even still have cap space to sign another, really great talent. So by the time, Markkanen's on the tail end of his prime, we have this really, really great team put together. So I think that's really appealing to me. Now, does Markkanen want to stay here long term? That's a concern I always have with, star players on the Jazz. They really want to be here, but at the end of the day, money talks, and I think we can offer him a pretty generous extension if he's interested in staying.
Yeah. Which I mean, in the scenario you're describing, it means that the Jazz, they hopefully hit on at least two of the three first rounders they get in this draft, where they can actually like be like rotation, like legit players in the NBA. And then you're maybe using your war chest of draft picks in a couple years to go and acquire talent at the trade line or during the offseason to try to, instead of building through the draft, if we can do a good job in this draft, maybe we don't have to rely as much on the draft in the future and instead look to like other trades or maybe other signings to get guys kind of filling around the cracks of the edges. So yeah, maybe my whole timeline thing, the Jazz are like, we can get there in 3 years if we can really hit on this draft. Like that might be a conversation they're having rather than we need to be good in 2028, 2029.
Yeah, mostly because like Kessler, like the other guy that's really young, like he's already shown he's very high floor, right? He doesn't, how much better is he going to be? I think something that you guys made fun of me last offseason for, by the way, saying that he could eventually like be a Brook Lopez kind of guy who can hit some corner threes. I think that you could add to his game. He showed it a little bit in the skills competition. Dude can occasionally go out and hit a three already. Also, like Brook Lopez isn't a good 3-point shooter. Like his second highest percentage in his career is like 32. So I don't know. You guys made fun of me for that comp. I think it was a really good comp with some year of hindsight. So I'm patting myself on the shoulder there. But
I will publicly apologize to you for making fun of your Brook Lopez, Walker Kessler take, and I'm glad that you were right.
But anyway, so I digress. Back to the thing, like Walker Kessler doesn't need a lot of years to be impactful. He was impactful last year. And Oshai, as a 3-and-D guy, he can be impactful in the near future, as he showed flashes of that last year. And so I think the pieces that the Jazz have could be in play. Like you don't get however many draft picks we have. I don't know the exact number. It's a lot. We're the new OKC basically. You don't get that and use and spend all those first round draft picks because spoiler alert, that's more than an NBA roster. That's how many first round draft picks we have. So yeah, we're going to be trading some of them, whether it's to move up, whether it's to get a disgruntled player. So there you go.
So it sounds like Landon, it sounds like you're pretty pat on the Jazz shouldn't try to trade with Portland for the third pick. Kyler, you seem to be like, if we can
I'd
get
have
Scoot,
a lot of conversations for Scoot.
yeah. And then like for me, it's like as of right now, I have Brandon Miller just ever so slightly ahead of Scoot. And I
I
don't
said
know,
you had
like
Scoot at like between 4 and 8.
I've had him as low as 8. I've had him as high as 2. Right now I have Scoot on my big board as 3.
Now,
But
if he
he's
was
really
just
more
like,
of a 2B.
yeah, if he was just like 2 or 3 inches taller, this would be a different conversation.
Oh, then he would be the
Yeah,
obvious number
here's the
2.
thing though. Okay, here's the thing. I guess we're having a Scoot Miller conversation. If we're talking about trading up the draft, we have to because he's pretty consensus number 2. You'll find places that have Brandon Miller number 2. Apparently, J Bobby's one of those places. Scoot Miller is incredible. He's 6'2". Yeah, he's rocked up. He's got a 6'9" wingspan. That's +7, folks. And let's not forget the guy we just raved about his defense, Casey Wallace. He's being measured by some people at the exact same freaking height. Like, just to like Donovan Mitchell was drafted as a defensive guard. He's 6'1". So saying that he can never be good defensively is just horse crap, dude. He's got the athleticism to do it. To me, what I look for is if you don't have the length and you don't have the athleticism to play defense. Scoot's freaking long and he's freaking athletic. He is absurd athletically. He can be a defender. He's shown flashes of being a defender. Yes, he like, oh, 6'2" point guard. Can you really like? I know this is an extreme example, but like there have been teams. I'm not even going to use it because it's an extreme example. There have been teams built around point guards that are going deep in the playoffs, and they're not 6'6" point guards either. They're average size point guards. Scoot just needs to be that S tier All NBA in the yearly conversation, getting it kind of tier player. But golly, if I've seen a better point guard prospect than Scoot come out in the last 5 years, I want you, please tell me who it is. Please. I would love for you to do it. He is honestly in 90% of the drafts. That's the guy that's going first overall. You just have freaking the best prospect of our generation also in this draft. He is an incredible prospect. He's just 6'2", which some people are making him go down on their board for that, which fine, do what you do. But he's an incredible point guard prospect.
Yeah, I mean, he's absolutely a top 3 pick. I don't think anyone's arguing that.
But just like, oh, he needs to be 2 inches taller. He could be an impact defender. Like, what's 2 inches going to do for him? He has a 6'9" wingspan. He's going to be a little bit taller, but still have the same length. I don't know. It's just like the +7 wingspan and the insane vertical athleticism. He's longer and he's going to be able to challenge vertically more than freaking Jalen Hood-Schifino, who's 6'5". He is. Well, actually, Jalen Hood-Schifino also has a really long wingspan, so that's a bad comp. But a lot of 6'5" point guards, I'll say.
Which, I mean, I think what it comes down to is that the more I look into Scoot and the more that I watch him, the more that I love him. And the more that I look at Brandon Miller stuff, the more that I love him too. Like, it just, for me, I will not be finalizing my big board probably till the day before the day of the draft, just because I'll still be doing research and still be doing some soul searching between them. But it's like, I will say that I came from the position of I was really worried about Scoot's height because like there's really only a handful of S tier guards who are shorter than like 6'4" or 6'5". But then the more that I've done research on Scoot and the more that I've seen him play, the more that I've realized, okay, whatever I originally thought like his chances were of hitting that level as a point guard, like whatever I thought his chances were, they've shot up like the more and more research that I do. And is it possible that he ends up as number 2 on my board? Absolutely, it's possible that he gets there. For me, though, just seeing Brandon Miller's combination of the size and the wingspan and just how the modern NBA is played. Having a 6'9" wing who can shoot at a near 40% clip, who can be a really impactful two-way player. Like for me, that's why I have Brandon Miller, just because I can see what his role could be in the NBA, being a guy like a Jason Tatum-ish, kind of in that same two-way impact, kind of small forward-ish role. Like I think that could be like what a Brandon Miller could be. And Scoot, I could see him being, one of the top 3 or 4 best guards in the league as his ceiling as well. So for me, I'll finalize my big board when it gets there. But as of right now, would I trade Lauri Markkanen for the 3rd pick to get one of those 2 guys? Because for right now, I have very little separating them and how I view them. As much as I love Markkanen, which I loved Markkanen for forever, I loved him coming out of the draft, I'd probably do it.
I'd have to have somebody, like I said, a lot of conversations to convince me not to for Scoot. Brandon Miller, to me, I guess we're just talking about the top of the draft, which I guess this is probably going to be the only time we talk about it, unless we actually do trade up, which would be insane, awesome content for us. Like Brandon Miller, you say he could be. I don't think his defensive ceiling is as high as Jason Tatum's. He's not that great of an athlete, honestly. He's really skilled, but he's not a great athlete. Which, I think, at the very highest level, it's hard. Like you're talking. I don't want to throw out comparisons, but like the Paul George comparison is the most common one that you see in the draft process, which Paul George at his ceiling was the 3rd place MVP for 1 year, so that's
and 3rd place defensive player of the year in the same year.
Yeah. And I don't see Brandon Miller being that kind of defender. I don't think he's athletic enough to reach that type of defense. I think he'll be solid defensively just on length, but I also just think like putting pressure on the rim, he improved a lot last year, but he's not blown by guys. He's going to have to be finishing through contact. How confident are you he can do that consistently? I think he's a little bit wiry. He could bulk up, obviously. So I just have some questions. I still like him. I'm sitting here like dogging him. He's number 3 on my board. I love Brandon Miller. I think he's easily worth that 3rd selection, or if he gets drafted 2nd, I wouldn't hate it. But I love Scoot. It is a low floor player. Like 6'2" does give you a floor, right? If he's 6'2" and his 3-point shot doesn't develop, that's a low floor. But if it does, he legitimately has best guard in the league potential because has everything except for a couple of inches, everything in his potential bag. And who knows? He's freaking 19 years old. Man can grow a couple inches. You never know. And if he does, goodness. Put him in a lab, and that's your point guard that you want, like the basketball gods, to create.
And I mean, kind of the elephant in the room we haven't discussed with Brandon Miller is that he kind of gave his gun to a friend that was used in a murder, which, that obviously might put a little bit of a damper just in terms of, I mean, like, I haven't seen anything other than that instance where would make me like assume that he's a super low character dude or anything like that. But obviously when you're building a team, you want to look at a guy who, is he going to be great in the locker room? Is he going to be a leader? Is he going to be someone who elevates your team, not just through their on-court ability, but what they're doing off-court? And there's definitely more questions about that with a Brandon Miller than there would be with a guy like a Scoot Henderson. Because like Scoot, I could see like just with the passion that he plays with and just his intensity, that could he be a guy that, and like this isn't a perfect comp, but like Jimmy Butler, you just see how much of a dog he is and how intense he is about how he elevates the rest of his team around him, especially in playoff scenarios. And I wonder that, is it even worth looking at Scoot from that perspective, saying this isn't just a guy that we want to have playing on the court of our basketball team, but he's a guy that we want to be the heart and soul of our team and like the face that we build our team around from like leadership standpoint, which in that area, he has a clear advantage over a guy like a Brandon Miller, which
is one he definitely has that mentality. Like when he faced Victor Wembanyama, like, oh no, I'm number 1. Like he has that confidence. Like, no, I'm the best player. You're a whole freaking, foot taller than me. I'm going at you. I do not give 2 cares. And he's out there. And all of a sudden, he's showing 3-point range that he didn't show the rest of the year. He's pulling up from 3. I mean, he showed it occasionally, but I don't know. I love Scoot Miller. I mean, as you could tell, like last year, I had Paolo Banchero at the top on a tier in his own because I think he can be the lead scorer on a playoff team. That's a skill set that I think is incredibly rare and I value very highly. And I think Scoot Miller, wow, Scoot might have a better chance of being that over Miller, just because I think Miller, if you put a premier defender on him, I just don't think he has the athleticism to just like drive by him and create easy looks, unless it's a short defender and he has the length to shoot over him, of course.
You could definitely be right about Henderson. Sure, I think he's a little different than like some of the other size guards you talked about, especially with that 6'10", and that's crazy. Well, there's some insane dimensions right there. Yes, my concern, again, this probably isn't the most valid, but like just history, right? Like look back in the history of the NBA, how many teams have won championships where their best player is under 6'3"? There's not many.
Yeah, I mean, you're talking about 1 inch between him and Steph Curry. Like, what's 1 inch? Tell me the value of an inch.
Okay, you could say 6'3". Even Steph Curry, right? He had to be the greatest shooter in the history of basketball to put the Warriors or to build the dynasty with them, right?
Yeah,
Snoop can do that. Is he going to be historically great?
Dude, I beg you to watch more of this guy. He shows every inkling that he could be. I'm not saying that you're going to bank on it, but like, could he be a 1A and a 1B? Is he going to carry it by himself? No, but who's doing that? That's 6'9" either. Who's doing that? That's 6'9" either. He's gonna need somebody else, obviously. Like nobody's carrying it by themselves. But can he be the 1A, the 1B? Can he? Yeah, absolutely. He can be. He can be. That's the ceiling. I think there's honestly 2.5 guys with that ceiling in this draft class. Him, Victor Wembanyama. I'm giving Brandon Miller half a point.
Okay.
Because I have some questions about his athleticism.
I love talking basketball with you guys. It just makes me happy, and it's going to be fun to see what the Jazz end up
We talk
doing.
so much about something that's never the Jazz aren't getting any of these guys, by the way. They're not. Like, what are the odds we get a top 3 pick? Ryan Smith isn't trading Larry Markkinen. The dude, like, is best friends with Jordan Clarkson, and he's untouchable. Dude, we're not trading Larry Markkinen if Jordan Clarkson's untouchable. It's not happening. This guy is attached to his players. He walked in the building and gave Rudy the Supermax because he loves Rudy. And that was not, I mean, we got off
that was a terrible decision.
Minnesota, you guys are the real G's. But like, the dude has been a Utah Jazz fan. He gets really attached to the players. He's like the super friendly, like, yo, let's go chill. You know, you saw him and Jordan Clarkson at a concert, J Bobby, whatever. Like, I feel like this guy is maybe going to have a history of being too attached to his players to a fault more than the Danny Ainge. Like, if this gives me a better chance to give a championship, I'm doing it. And maybe for that reason, he hired Danny Ainge, because he knows he's too attached to his players and he needs that other point of view. But I still I feel like Ryan Smith might veto Larry Markkinen move after last season.
Which we'll see. He's still a young owner. He hasn't been doing it for a long time. We'll see how that changes over time. But I have one last question for both of you. Between now and when we close this new episode, Victor Wembanyama is untouchable. There is nobody who is going to, like, San Antonio's taking with the number 1 overall pick. There's not a scenario.
The dude could tear his Achilles tomorrow, both of them, and he's going first in the draft.
But as a fun theoretical, like, just thought process, what would you be willing to give up in terms of Jazz assets to get Victor Wembanyama? Like, where is your cutoff point where that's a little too rich for my blood?
All of our picks, all of Minnesota's picks, all of our one Los Angeles pick, and everybody except for Laurie, we're running 2 men on the court next year.
And we're still winning more games in Detroit.
No, it would, just theoretically, I mean, I don't know. I probably wouldn't even go all those picks, just because there's always a chance some guy fails and you don't trading that much for one player. But he's definitely the best player I've ever scouted. He's so good.
Yeah, I mean, there's no player, there's no group of picks that I wouldn't give up for Wemby. I'd give him Vivint Arena or Delta Center now if they wanted it.
Yeah, welcome back, Delta Center. Shout out getting the OG name back. But yeah, I mean, like 10 picks, Markkanen, we're not even hesitating. We're giving
Nope.
that for Webby.
Nope.
Yeah, for sure. Also, I guess we still have some time. So, is there other spots in the draft? Because we talked about it's either Laurie or bust, but is there? Do you think it's worth it to trade up to 6 to pick Cam Whitmore? Do you think it's worth it to trade? Like, is there a player you think is worth trading up as long as it takes, I don't know, 16 and a future first? Is there somebody else outside of maybe the top 5 you think you'd be willing to give 16 and let's say one of the Minnesota picks too?
I would do that for Cam Whitmore. If we could get up to like 6, 100%, I would give up that 16th pick, maybe player or something for that.
I almost kind of like the idea of seeing if we could still pick our 9, but then there's also been rumors that Dallas might be shopping their pick at 10, almost seeing if we could package 16 and maybe a future first, and I don't know, Taylor Horton Tucker, something like that, and seeing if we can move up from 16 to 10, and then taking, because like for me, I kind of have a cutoff around the 11 range in terms of skill. So for me, getting 2 of the 6 guys that we've talked about between this podcast and last, I think that would be worth giving up 16 and a future first in a contract. Like if that would be something that'd be possible, I don't know if that's quite enough to get us to move up those 6 spots or if Dallas would entertain that. But for me, like there's just so many guys that I really, really like in that kind of 6 to 11 range that I would rather see if we can get something, maybe see if we can get like the 10 or 11 pick rather than trying to trade up for 6 to just get one. Because I would love to get 2 players in the lottery in this draft if possible.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
wouldn't
for
even mind
me,
giving up like 9 pick. I think there's a lot of parity between picks like 10 through 20. So if you give up 9, maybe some more draft picks down the line to move up a couple spots, I would do that and still keep the 16th pick as well.
yeah, I'd sooner give up 9 a Minnesota and a Cleveland or whatever, but I just don't know. I feel like people are going to want 2 picks in this draft. I don't think Dallas would entertain the offer you said because they like Portland. Their trade rumors are for win now moves. Like they're trying to not have Luka get disgruntled, so they don't want worse picks in this draft. They don't want more future assets. They want more now assets. So,
Which like apparently Luka hired a dietitian. That was a Bleacher Report earlier this week.
dude,
So
those
is Luka
Bleacher
going to
reports
come
were there
back?
last year too about him getting in shape. So there's always that. Like the fat players always do
I can
stuff in
still
the
have
off
hope.
season that make them
I can
skinny,
still have
but
hope.
they don't get skinny.
Your
So
metabolism is what it is.
also, I think like the rumors that the Jazz are super interested in Lucas should be a topic at some point. But just because I have some takes on that probably aren't popular, but um, I would do it. I have a top 6 cutoff. I would only do it for number 5s and 6 there because I think my number 4 could actually be available at 9, so I just wouldn't trade up for him. Cam Whitmore is one of those players. I do it for Cam Whitmore, and Amen Thompson is my number 5 player on the board. If he's available after 5, he's sliding a little bit. I would do it just because I think we've been talking about these defensive playmaking, maybe can't shoot guards. I think he has the highest ceiling of those. So I would be willing to give up a little bit for that to just raise the ceiling a little bit. But yeah, I would be hesitant to give up 16 just because I really love that spot for the possibility. Like Cason Wallace is unlikely, but between Cason Wallace, Jalen Hood-Schifino, and Kobe Buffkin, I love
One
all
of
3. They're all
one of
3
them could be there. One of them could
top
definitely
12.
be
There's a
there.
good chance that they're. It's not guaranteed. I would like if 2 of them are gone by like pick 13. I would try to trade up to ensure that we got one of those 3 because I think like defensive point guard is really really strong in kind of the late lottery, early to mid teens in this draft. So.
Which I think of this conversation that we've had in the second part of this podcast has taught us anything is that there are a lot of topics that we still want to talk about. There's a lot of conversations that we want to have that we haven't. So we are going to be bringing you more and more content throughout the offseason, more of our conversations because there's still a lot of draft stuff to go over, trade possibilities, current Jazz roster, potential trades. Like there's so much that we still have to discuss. So I think this will do it for this week, but we will be back next week with an all new episode. Also, shout out to the guy who asked us to talk about Cason Wallace in the comments of our last video. We hope you enjoyed our conversation about him. And we're pretty open. If there's any conversations, any topics you want us to cover, feel free to drop it in the comments, leave us a like and a follow, and we will be more than happy to discuss any topics that you think would be relevant for us as we look at the Jazz offseason. This has been another episode of the Upper Bowl Perspective. Thank you to Kyler and Landon, as always, for hopping on and talking hoops with me, and we'll see y'all next week.
Yeah.